Hello. 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 Hi. Hi. Mhm. How are you? I'm home. You're home. We've been home for quite some time, haven't we? And now he's home. And it's time to start a new book. It's time to start a glorious book called The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. Um, I'm going to get you started by allowing you a little bit of background in regards to this story. One of the things that I want to share with you is that a miraculous journey only happens to those who find out that they've been on the journey, especially when they're unwilling. The other thing that I've noticed a lot in regards to journeys is sometimes they can be in your head. It can be in your head where you are working through maybe a challenge that you have. Maybe it's a character trait that you're trying to make changes with, or sometimes it is something that you recognize that needs to be altered. Maybe your views on something or the way you taste a specific food. Sometimes in school, you go on an educational journey. Sometimes we are really good at acting like we aren't good at a particular subject. And one of the things that was often taught to me is that you aren't good at a particular subject yet, but that you need to keep your mind open, available, and ready to go. So another kind of journey, of course, is a journey that I hope that you've been on, where you leave the safety of where you have become so comfortable and you go out into the world. Different people come into your lives. They impress you with wisdom. Some of them make you afraid. Some of them move you towards wherever it is that you are headed. And sometimes you feel alone. You feel like you're not with somebody. And yet at the same time, you realize that you are. And that is going to be a lot of the challenges that our main character, little Edward Tulane, oh, where is he? Oh, there he is right there, Edward Tulane. And that is what he's going to experience on this adventure. So, let's see, is there anything else? Oh, yeah. I need to explain one more thing. Edward is not going to be like Despero, who is a fictional mouse who has animation, who has the ability to move on her own. Not going to be like Pinocchio when he was a puppet. Not going to be like, oh, I don't know. You guys watch a lot of those Lego shows, right? Like the old Lego shows. Not going to be pieces of Lego that have stop frame animation and movement. Edward Tulane is a China rabbit. And a China rabbit is important to think about. China rabbit is a rabbit that is made of porcelain, right? Like China. It's actually called China. It's very fine, especially in the way olden days. China was created by skilled artists. And it was very fine and quite fragile. Um, Edward Tulane is a China rabbit, meaning that his head is made out of plate material. His hands, I believe, are made out of plate material, but you'll have to hear that on the way in. And his ears are kind of fluffy and have wires in them so that they can kind of be reset and reorganized. Remember that at the beginning of a book, it takes a while to get into the idea of um, getting to know who the characters are, getting to know what kind of people the characters are. So you need to listen for words, you need to listen for language, you need to pay attention to how they react to other characters as we go on through. And most importantly, we want you to gather some of the beautiful, beautiful language, but some of the beautiful visualizations. So, why don't you grab yourself a piece of paper? Why don't you grab yourself a pencil to start with? So, like if you need to, you can do it just like I might in my notebook, and maybe just find a page in that notebook. The good thing about doing it in the notebook is that you are able to collect and have each day's taken care of. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us get into one of my absolutely most favorite books, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. It is by Kate DiCamillo, so same character as our wondrous character, Despero, from earlier in the springtime. But we are starting at the very beginning, and I love the very beginning of a book. The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. This is called the title page. I want to make sure that you are able to see that beautiful picture. Remember that picture, okay? Chair, window, little bunny ears. Okay. Kate DiCamillo wrote the book. This is illustrated by Bagram Ibatuyin. Okay. For Jane Resch Thomas, who gave me the rabbit and told me his name. The heart breaks and lives by breaking. It is necessary to go through dark and deeper dark and not to turn. From The Testing Tree by Stanley Kunitz. I've never read that, but I love that. The heart breaks and lives by breaking. It is necessary to go through dark and deeper dark and not to turn. We'll have to come back to that as we go on. The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. Chapter 1. Looks like a watch. Once, in a house on Egypt Street, there lived a rabbit who was made almost entirely of china. He had china arms and china legs, china paws and a china head, a china torso and a china nose. His arms and legs were jointed by wire so that his china elbows and china knees could be bent, giving him much freedom of movement. His ears were made of real rabbit fur, and beneath the fur there were strong, bendable wires which allowed the ears to be arranged into poses that reflected the rabbit's mood. Jaunty, tired, full of ennui. I'm going to have to look up that word. Ennui. His tail, too, was made of real rabbit fur and was fluffy and soft and well-shaped. Do you have a picture? Listen to all those words. The rabbit's name was Edward Tulane, and he was tall. He measured almost 3 feet from the tip of his ears to the tip of his feet. His eyes were painted a penetrating and intelligent blue. In all, Edward Tulane felt himself to be an exceptional specimen. Only his whiskers gave him pause. They were long and elegant, as they should be, but they were of uncertain origin. Edward felt quite strongly that they were not whiskers of a rabbit. Whom the whiskers had belonged to initially, what unsavory animal, was a question that Edward could not bear to consider for too long, and so he did not. He preferred, as a rule, not to think unpleasant thoughts. Edward's mistress was a 10-year-old, dark-haired girl named Abilene Tulane, who thought almost as highly of Edward as Edward thought of himself. Each morning after she dressed herself for school, Abilene dressed Edward. The China Rabbit was in possession of an extraordinary wardrobe composed of handmade silk suits, custom shoes fashioned from the finest leather and designed specifically for his rabbit feet, and a wide array of hats equipped with holes so that they could easily fit over Edward's large and expressive ears. Each pair of well-cut pants had a small pocket for Edward's gold pocket watch. There's the watch. Abilene wound this watch for him each morning. "Now, Edward," she said to him after she was done winding the watch, "when the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 3, I will come home to you." She placed Edward on a chair in the dining room and positioned the chair so that Edward was looking out the window and could see the path that led up to the Tulane front door. Abilene balanced the watch on his left leg. She kissed the tips of his ears, and then she left, and Edward spent the day staring out at Egypt Street, listening to the tick of his watch and waiting. Of all the seasons of the year, the rabbit most preferred winter, for the sun set early then, and the dining room windows became dark, and Edward could see his own reflection in the glass. And what a reflection it was! What an elegant figure he cut! Edward never ceased to be amazed at his own fineness. In the evening, Edward sat at the dining room table with the other members of the Tulane family. Abilene, her mother and father, and Abilene's grandmother, who was called Pellegrina. True, Edward's ears barely cleared the tabletop, and true also, he spent the duration of the meal staring straight ahead at nothing but the bright and blinding white of the tablecloth. But he was there. A rabbit was welcome at the table. Abilene's parents found it charming that Abilene considered Edward real, and that she sometimes requested that a phrase or story be repeated because Edward had not heard it. "Papa," Abilene would say, "I'm afraid that Edward didn't catch that last bit." Abilene's father would then turn in the direction of Edward's ears and speak slowly, repeating what he had just said for the benefit of the China Rabbit. Edward pretended, out of courtesy to Abilene, to listen, but in truth, he was not very interested in what people had to say. And also, he did not care for Abilene's parents and their condescending manner toward them. All adults, in fact, condescended to him. Only Abilene's grandmother spoke to him as Abilene did, as one equal to another. Pellegrina was very old. She had a large, sharp nose and bright black eyes that shone like dark stars. It was Pellegrina who was responsible for Edward's existence. It was she who had commissioned his making. She who had ordered his silk suits and his pocket watch, his jaunty hats and his bendable ears, his fine leather shoes and his jointed arms and legs, all from a master craftsman in her native France. It was Pellegrina who had given him as a gift to Abilene on her 7th birthday. You doing the math? They've been together for 3 years. And it was Pellegrina who came each night to tuck Abilene into her bed and Edward into his. "Will you tell us a story, Pellegrina?" Abilene asked her grandmother each night. "Not tonight, lady," said Pellegrina. "When?" asked Abilene. "What night?" "Soon," said Pellegrina. "Soon there will be a story." And then she turned off the light, and Edward and Abilene lay in the dark of the bedroom. "I love you, Edward," Abilene said each night after Pellegrina had left. She said those words, and then she waited, almost as if she expected Edward to say something in return. Edward said nothing. He said nothing because, of course, he could not speak. He lay in his small bed next to Abilene's large one. He stared up at the ceiling and listened to the sound of her breath entering and leaving her body, knowing that soon she would be asleep, because Edward's eyes were painted on, and he could not close them. He was always awake. Sometimes I still can imagine that my stuffed animals or friends' stuffed animals or dolls are alive, like they're watching, right? Not in always a scary way. There've been some scary dolls, and there's some scary doll books for sure, if you're into that kind of stuff. But um, this idea of Edward Tulane's eyes painted on, these beautiful blue eyes just staring, never makes you feel alone, right? Especially if you're loved by it. The problem is that you just heard in the real world, he can't speak, but it seems as though he can think. You guys feel like that might be possible? Hmm? Sometimes, if Abilene accidentally put him into his bed on his side instead of on his back, he could see through the cracks in the curtains and out into the dark of night. On clear nights, the stars shone, and their pinprick light comforted Edward in a way that he could not quite understand. Often, he stared at the stars all night until the dark finally gave way to dawn. Wait, that's a personification. It's not really, but it kind of is a personification. You remember what a personification is? Well, I guess it's in some ways kind of like Edward Tulane, really. I mean, he's being given person type characteristics, like he can think, like he has feelings towards different characters, even though he can't talk. And obviously, he can't move on his own. Chapter 2. You know what else I love about this book? It doesn't need titles to chapters. It's just we're moving into another idea, another phase, another section. And in this manner, Edward's days passed on one on to the other. Nothing remarkable happened. Oh, there was the occasional small domestic drama. Once, while Abilene was at school, the neighbor's dog, a male brindled boxer, inexplicably named Rosie, came into the house, uninvited and unannounced, and lifted his leg on the dining room table, spraying the white tablecloth with urine. He then trotted over and sniffed Edward. And before Edward even had time to consider the implications of being sniffed by a dog, he was in Rosie's mouth, and Rosie was shaking him back and forth vigorously, growling and drooling. Better show you that. Moment with Rosie. Moment with Rosie right there. Yeah. Fortunately, Abilene's mother walked past the dining room and witnessed Edward's suffering. "Drop it!" she shouted to Rosie, and Rosie, surprised into obedience, did as he was told. Edward's silk suit was stained with drool, and his head ached for several days after. But it was his ego that had suffered the most damage. Abilene's mother had referred to him as it, and she was more outraged at the dog's urine on her tablecloth than she was about the indignities that Edward had suffered at the jaws of Rosie. And then there was the time that a maid, new to the Tulane household, and eager to impress her employers with her diligence, came upon Edward sitting on his chair in the dining room. "What is this bunny doing here?" she said out loud. Edward did not care at all for the word bunny. He found it derogatory in the most extreme. The maid bent over him and looked into his eyes. She said. She stood back up. She put her hands on her hips. "I reckon you're just like every other thing in this house, something needing to be cleaned and dusted." And so the maid vacuumed Edward Tulane. She sucked each of his long ears up the vacuum cleaner hose. She pawed at his clothes and beat his tail. She dusted his face with brutality and efficiency. And in her zeal to clean him, she vacuumed Edward's gold pocket watch right off his lap. The watch went into the maw of the vacuum cleaner with a distressing clank that the maid did not even seem to hear. When she was done, she put the dining room chair back at the table, and uncertain about exactly where Edward belonged. Sorry, let me start that over. It was sloppy. I was thinking about him, and I hope he's not too distracting. When she was done, she put the dining room chair back at the table, and uncertain about exactly where Edward belonged, she finally decided to shove him in among the dolls on a shelf in Abilene's room. "That's right," she said the maid. "There you go." She left Edward on the shelf at a most awkward and inhuman angle. His nose was actually touching his knees, and he waited there with the dolls twittering and giggling at him like a flock of demented and unfriendly birds until Abilene came home from school and found him missing and ran from the room to room, calling his name. Edward, she shouted, Edward! There was no way, of course, for him to let her know where he was, no way for him to answer her. He could only sit and wait. When Abilene found him, she held him close, so close that Edward could feel her heart beating, leaping almost out of her chest in its agitation. Edward, she said, oh, Edward, I love you. I never want you to be away from me. The rabbit, too, was experiencing a great emotion, but it was not love. It was annoyance that he had been so mightily inconvenienced, that he had been handled by the maid as cavalierly as an inanimate object, a serving bowl, say, or a teapot. The only satisfaction to be had from the entire affair was that the new maid was dismissed immediately. So the maid, who was brand new to the job, it tells us a little bit about the Tulane family, right? I mean, they have enough money to hire a maid, somebody who's going to come in and clean up after them. Most of us won't ever have that. The other thing that I noticed is that she was just doing a diligent job. She found a doll on a chair in the middle of the dining room, and it makes complete sense that she would probably want to put it away. Now, she put it back in a very, very smart spot with all of the other animals, right? And the other thing that I find distressing about the situation is that because of her act of putting away Edward Tulane, she was excused inextricably. I believe that's the word. Is that the word that it said? Oh, she was dismissed immediately. No correction, no, hey, we don't mess with the doll. But on this case, it was immediate firing. So next time you are a maid or a servant of some sort, you should probably ask to put everything away, right? Makes a lot of sense. And wasn't it interesting that Edward was offended when mom called Edward an it? Because a doll would be considered an it unless you have given it a personality. And I guess, obviously, Abilene believes that Edward is alive. Just like maybe some of you think that our little buddy over here is alive, right? Has he been making faces at you? You've been making faces? Don't act like you're not hearing me. Anyway, okay, so is it okay if I read one more chapter? I'd like to read one more chapter. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to see it. I see tablecloth and glasses and wine glasses and plates, very fancily placed there, right? So do you remember where this is from? Kate DiCamillo already gave us a little bit of an explanation. Let's hear where the setting of this next chapter begins. Chapter 3. She's called the Queen Mary, said Abilene's father, and you and your mamma and I shall sail on her all the way to London. What about Pellegrina? Said Abilene. I will not go, said Pellegrina. I will stay. Edward, of course, was not listening. He found the talk around the dinner table excruciatingly dull. In fact, he made a point of not listening, if he could help it. But then Abilene did something unusual, something that forced him to pay attention. As the talk about the ship continued, Abilene reached for Edward and took him from his chair and stood him in her lap. What about Edward? She said, with her voice high and uncertain. What about him, darling? Said her mother. Will Edward be sailing on the Queen Mary with us? Well, of course, if you wish, although you are getting a little old for such things as China rabbits. Nonsense, said Abilene's father jovially. Who would protect Abilene if Edward was not there? From the vantage point of Abilene's lap, Edward could see the whole table spread out before him in a way that he could never when he was seated on his own chair. He looked up at the glittering array of silverware and glasses and plates. He saw the amused and condescending looks of Abeline's parents, and then his eyes met Pellegrina's. She was looking at him in a way a hawk hanging lazily in the air might study a mouse on the ground. Perhaps the rabbit's fur on Edward's ears and tail and the whiskers on his nose had some dim memory of being hunted, for a shiver went through him. Yes, said Pellegrina without taking her eyes off Edward. Who would watch over Abeline if the rabbit were not there? That night, when Abeline asked, as she did every night, if there would be a story, Pellegrina said, "Tonight, lady, there will be a story." Abeline sat up in bed. "I think that Edward needs to sit here with me," she said, "so that he can hear the story too." "I think that is best," said Pellegrina. "Yes, I think the rabbit must hear the story." Abeline picked Edward up, sat him next to her in her bed, and arranged the covers around him. Then she said to Pellegrina, "We're ready now." "So," said Pellegrina. She coughed. "And so the story begins with a princess." "A beautiful princess?" Abeline asked. "A very beautiful princess." "How beautiful?" "You must listen," said Pellegrina. "It is all in the story." And that is where I promised to end. Good old chapter 4, right before Miss Abeline. Sorry, here's the story of Pellegrina's final story. They've been waiting forever for this story, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, little picture to put in your head. I wish my camera was better on this computer. Here, I'll scoot it back. Yeah, I can't see him, can't see him, can't see him, can't see him. There, Edward Tulane. There. So there's Edward Tulane. So, ladies and gentlemen, there have been some technical difficulties today. I figured that I was going to be with you live, but I'm going to have to do a little bit of homework on how to make sure that I can go live again. But all is well and everything's fine. We are here. It is that beautiful time of the season. You can see the time of season. We're on winter break, and COVID-19 is still ravaging our outside world. And so we're home safe, we're home sound. Please remember, keep washing your hands. Please stay home, wear masks, all those good things. And without further ado, I just want you to know that I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I look forward to being with you again, and keep reading. And until we see each other again, I love you. Now, get out of here.